Woke-ish podcast. This is Ebony.
And this is Zelma.
Thanks so much for listening. This is our second episode. If you listened last week, you noticed that we did not have a shout-out segment, but we're going to start incorporating it from this episode on out. So if you have someone or a company or something like that you want to shout out, please send it to us in an email at woke.ishpodcast@gmail.com. That's woke.ishpodcast@gmail.com. And our first shout out is...
So I'm going to shout out a woman by the name of Damaris Gonzalez, and she is a United We Dream leader. So United We Dream is an organization, it's actually national, but they have local chapters in different cities all across the country to address the issues that immigrants are facing, and most recently facing what DACA recipients are facing, which is the possible termination of the program. So I met her personally once at a rally, and I was very inspired by her, not only because she just seemed very unafraid to be vocal, but because she herself is undocumented. And she's very vocal about that. She lets you know right up front, which, if you're not aware, it takes a lot of risk to identify as undocumented, especially where we live, which is not particularly super friendly to that community. And she just always garners support from the community to address issues that affect people that she may or may not know. So if there's people who are detained, people who are deported, she always makes sure to rally, to spread news. She spreads information to other immigrants about things that may be helpful in protecting themselves and learning their rights. And so from her Facebook, I wanted to share this quote that she posted, and it is, "There is no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people won't stop." And that very much characterizes her, so I wanted to give her a shout out. She's just a person from the community, not just, but she's a person from the community and doing great things, and definitely an inspiration to me, and I know an inspiration to others.
So that concludes our shout out segment. Again, if you have any person or company or something like that you want to shout out who is doing great things in the community, shoot us an email.
And now time for our In the Know segment, where we discuss some current events from the past week. And I wanted to start it off talking about something that's been in the news recently, which is the immigrant caravan. And if you're not aware of not following the story, it's about over 1,000 individuals that are migrating from Central America, mostly from Honduras, and they are escaping poverty, violence, and disorganization by their governments, and attempting to gain entry into the United States via Mexico. And so they did a story on this on Fox News, because this isn't the first caravan. And we believe that in previous caravans, they have either settled in Mexico or have smuggled into the United States. So Fox News did a story about how dangerous this was and how they were heading to the U.S., they were heading to our borders. And so naturally, Trump tweeted that this was an issue, and his response was to send the National Guard to the border to defend it. And I, as an immigrant, have been following the story and just really overwhelmed at the interviews of the actual migrants describing why they're leaving their countries. They see themselves more as refugees and less like just people who want to take advantage of a government. And they feel that they have no other option but to just leave their homes. And I initially I didn't know how to feel, because we see this not just in Central America, but all over the world. We see displaced refugees. We see this in Syria. We see this in Africa. We saw this from Asian countries when they were escaping communism. And so it's not a new phenomenon. But what makes it, to me, even more worrisome is that they really don't have anywhere to go. In South America, there's their own issues. Venezuela is dealing with mass exodus of their migrants who are heading to nearby countries like Colombia. And so I just don't know where they're supposed to go. They don't feel like it's safe enough to go in their countries. Their countries are not only overtaken by gangs, but also these mass deportation of people from the United States, the accumulation of immigrants returning to these Central American countries that don't have stable governments and already have gangs in control of territories, are now receiving way more people than they can handle. So as a result, people feel the need to leave. And Mexico's response to this caravan is to give them permits that allow them to have free movement in their country for 20 days. And a lot of them have decided to continue their journey to the United States. They are aiming to go to Tijuana, and from Tijuana to gain entry into the United States. They thought that they could ask for asylum, but Trump has made it clear that there will be no asylum to these individuals. And so, given that context, I just want to know, Ebony, like, what do you think how do you think the U.S. should respond to these individuals? Do you think that they're refugees, or do you think that this is not an issue that is something that the U.S. needs or should tackle?
So it's one, I need to, I guess, preface this with, you and I have had discussions, and I was really ignorant on the matter before you clarified a lot of things, because in my like vocabulary, caravan means vehicle, right? And so when I was reading about like these thousands of people in a caravan, I was like, what is happening? How are these people being transported? And then you told me that they're walking. Everybody is on foot. And so I think that just to underscore this, like how grave and serious this is to them, that they would walk across several countries to get to the United States. If we are talking about people fleeing countries, and we, like you said, like there have been people fleeing religious, political, social persecution since the actual foundation of this country, because that was how the premise upon which it was founded, people fleeing religious persecution. And so if we're talking about people fleeing their countries and how we should measure how serious the tension is or conflict is in that country, the willingness to walk thousands of miles to get someplace, I think, should evidence that it's that serious. And so we also talked about Trump being, with that being said, we also talked about Trump being anti-asylum seekers or refugees in general. And so I think that he is kind of silencing or muting all conversation about, upon what grounds do we allow people to seek asylum in the United States? Because the reasons are varied, right? So people seek asylum for different reasons, and he's not open to any conversation. It doesn't matter what the turmoil is like. And so I think that based on the fact that there are, like you said, gangs are overtaking large swaths of Central America, then that does, I think, in my mind, qualify these people as refugees. Like they're trying, I don't know, it just seems so inhumane to me to turn away people, tell people to go back to their countries where they could, literally sending them to their deaths. I think that we need to change the way that we think about immigration. We need to, there's so many changes. We need just like a big overhaul in the way that we think about immigration, in the way that we think about asylum. And one thing that I had brought up to you earlier was about immigrant gateways, or cities or states that have historically been welcoming to immigrants. Some of those places are certain parts of California, certain parts of Texas, certain parts of Florida, and New York. And I think that one of the conversations that these states have been kind of having at the local level that I think have transcended and kind of been had at the federal level is concern for overpopulation. And so I think that one of the ways that the United States the federal government or whomever could kind of rectify this is by instituting a way for immigrants to settle in states that are not overly populated or do not have concerns about overpopulation. And I mean, there's tons of space in the Midwest. Tons of space. And this might be my idealism speaking, but I think that if the United States was to say, okay, you can immigrate into this country, but you can't go to these particular states or whatever, they could people could live in places where the climate right now, or where those people don't have to interact with immigrants right now, and if they did, for instance, begin to interact with them, it could potentially change their mental frame. Again, this is my optimism speaking. But I think that a big part of the issue in the United States and in the way that we talk about racism, and in the way that we, talk about xenophobia and all of these other phobias and isms, is that people that are anti-diversity, that are anti-people of color, flee to these Midwestern states and just live amongst themselves. And if we forced diversity upon them, which I don't think, again, that the government would be willing to do, but if we did force diversity upon them, we might see gradual, but I think over time, very stark changes and shifts in the way that our country deals with difference. And so that was a very long-winded answer to your question. Yes, I do think that these people are refugees. Do I think that the United States is going to do anything about it? No. But that is not the point of this podcast. We can talk about our optimism. We can talk about what we would like to see in a perfect world. So I would, and I mean, another question that I had asked you earlier was, if the United States did allow the caravan to enter the country, what then? Like, what would the United States does not, according to the government, have the resources to support that many people. So you might say that it is better, but I'm going to pose the question, do you think that it is better to allow them to enter the United States, but then to potentially be homeless or worse?
Yeah, I mean, there used to be programs that the government had for people from these countries, from Central America, and not only Central America, but even other countries like Haiti, where you could request asylum based on all these different reasons for leaving war-torn countries full of violence, domestic violence. But we no longer have them, and Trump has slowly just ended those programs. So even if, like you said, they were to allow the caravan to enter the United States, one, there are no programs available for them to seek asylum, and two, the laws have changed so that you have to be a citizen to even get anything. You can't be a resident, you can't be someone with a visa. Like, it's very specific about who's entitled to what. So we would be allowing these people to enter without any form of help, without any form of aid, without speaking the language, without having a job, without having a place to sleep, without having protection. And so a part of me is like, maybe is it worse to let them in and then deport them, or to let them in and then just leave them to the streets, or to leave them to militarized border patrol, or to allow them to try to, like, I'm waiting for what's going to happen. Is there really going to be a showdown between these immigrants, unarmed, and the National Guard? Like, is Trump really expecting this showdown where there's physical altercations between these two groups? Or, like, what's going to happen? Because these people are saying they're going to keep going.
Well, according to Trump, and this is something that he tweeted a few days ago. So he says, Border Patrol agents are not allowed to properly do their job at the border. So we can talk about what properly means here. Because of ridiculous liberal, in parentheses, Democrat laws like catch and release, getting more dangerous, caravans coming. Republicans must go to nuclear option to pass tough laws now. No more DACA deal.
Yeah.
So I think that, I mean, he is making it very clear, abundantly clear, what he would like to see happen and what is actually happening. And so I think that when he says the word properly do their job, if he's saying that catch and release is not enough, then what he is suggesting probably is some kind of violent interaction between them. I think that, and I mean, he goes on to tweet over the next few days that Mexico needs to more carefully close off their border, not allow these people to enter Mexico, because then it makes it easier for them to enter the United States. So he not only wants American Border Patrol to act violently on these people, but he also wants Mexico to do that as well. And he's threatening to, he said, cut off their cash cow if they don't. Talking about NAFTA. So I would not put it past him. I do think that that is what he would like to see happen.
And I also want to clarify, because I know a lot of people maybe aren't really understanding what DACA is, and so these people would in no way be eligible for DACA. In order to be a DACA recipient, you have to be younger than 31 on June 15th, 2012, and must have come to the U.S. when you were younger than 16, living in the U.S. since 2007. So I think even mentioning DACA and some people running with it saying that these immigrants were going to try to take advantage of DACA is not something they would be eligible for. So for him to put that program, linking it to this caravan, I feel is just another way that he's creating this narrative about immigrants, and he's passing around ignorance, and he's not being accurate. And I think that it's dangerous, because DACA, it's its own separate issue than this caravan. I mean, overall immigration is a huge issue, like you said, that we may have to really work on and rehaul, because there's a point where we just are at a point where we need to move forward in one direction. But I just wanted to clarify that these individuals would not be eligible for DACA, and so people who think that these people would want to do that once they get here, and so that therefore we should totally cancel DACA, is, I think, not an informed way to speak about that program.
And the fact that it is our actual president that is uninformed on the issue is super problematic, because he is spewing out misinformation to his masses that he literally says these big flows of people are all trying to take advantage of DACA. They want in on the act. And it's like, no, that's BS. Mm-hmm. That is BS.
Yeah, they're not eligible.
I mean, and I think that if we are honest with ourselves and we consider what kind of state Honduras and some other countries are in, we would understand, if we could extend a little bit of empathy, we could understand why people would be fleeing. Mm-hmm. I don't know why the United States thinks that it's the only country where people would have the desire to live. Like, how easily would someone be able to sway you to get up and leave your home and then go live in a place where you may not know anyone? It's not that easy. It's not an easy decision to come by. And so if there are 1,500 people willing to get up and leave their country in hopes of finding a safer place to live and to raise their children and things like that, we might consider what conditions you would have to be under for someone to, not even for someone, to convince yourself to get up, take your kids and the clothes on your back and go and live in another country. Not even just another country, but another country where they are not welcoming, the current administration is not welcoming to immigrants. Like, this is the climate that they are willing to enter because of what they're fleeing. Mm-hmm. You know, so I mean, we need to do better on the empathy. Like, we are really, really struggling in terms of that. Like, we are just unable to even think about what other people might be experiencing.
Yeah, and I think Trump's America First or America Only narrative, although some people may fall behind it and agree that it's time for the United States to focus on issues that impact the United States, But I think when you live in a world, your country's decisions influence one another. And so, I mean, there's evidence that the mass deportation that has been happening from the United States back to these already fragile and violence-infested countries are having a consequences of mass exodus of people from those countries. So when you send thousands and thousands of people back to a country that's already struggling, there's gonna be consequences to that. And to not expect anything to impact decisions that the United States makes, I think is unrealistic. And so sometimes this is exactly why I argue that America first or America only is maybe that was okay before the internet and before globalization and before we had these networks of trading with other countries and before we had such immigration, but we don't live in that world anymore. We are not in the 50s, we are not in the 40s, we are in 2018, and every decision that one country makes impacts the decisions of another. And so I think this is just a domino effect of mass deportation. And does that mean that the U.S. should do something about it? Some people would argue not. But then what do you have? You have issues where you have thousands of people trying to find a way to be safer and making decisions for themselves, and the U.S. has to decide how to react. So I don't think that this will be the last caravan. I don't think that this is the last we've heard about mass exodus of immigrants. We see this all across the world. The U.S. is not an exception, and I think that we just need to be smarter about how we respond. And I don't know all the answers. I don't think this is an overnight problem. I don't think this is just a U.S. problem. I think that there are lots of countries that have to help each other and figure out ways to address these issues of corruption and violence and poverty and high murder rates. But I think that to just send troops to the border and say, we're just not going to let you in, is only a temporary way and I would argue maybe an inhumane way to deal with this issue.
It's definitely a Band-Aid.
Yep. And so, more sad and distressing news this week, but I don't know if you've been following the Syria chemical attack. And so Syria has been in the news for a long time. It's been very unstable. There's lots of internal conflict. The government is trying to take back a lot of territories that have been overtaken by rebels. And so this recently we saw evidence, which I don't know if you saw, Ebony, but they actually showed video footage of these people not only dead, but of people at the hospitals. And it's really disturbing because the video that I saw was mostly women and children, and no one is taking responsibility. We believe, and by we, the United States and many other countries believe, that it was Syria itself committing this attack on its own people in an attempt to get to the rebels. So just kind of like these civilians just happened to be casualties of war for them. And it's very sad and distressing because we just don't know what to do. And then once again, Trump comes in and says that he will give us, I think a day ago, he said 48 hours. It might be 24 hours now. His big reality star, type of way to deal with things, but that he will tell us soon how he's going to respond. Once again, criticizing Obama, saying that had Obama reacted with military strength like he would the other time this happened, then this would have been totally avoided. And so kind of continuing to the immigrant caravan issue, Ebony, like what do you think is the responsibility of the U.S. to the Syrian attack? Syria is an ally of Russia, and as we know, Russia is not a country that we're on really good terms with, especially given the fact that we argue that they tampered with our election. But should we take any steps in this area of the world again when we have our own issues at home or near home? Should we come to their defense? Should other countries? Who's policing this? Who's supposed to help?
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't. Because I think that the way that the United States goes about handling or mitigating or negotiating with other countries is via war. And so I don't know that there is I think that there's probably like a lesser of two evils option here, but I don't think that there are any truly good options. I think that, for instance, if we were talking about before, if the United States went and helped countries build some kind of economy or some kind of infrastructure so that there could be more cash flow and just boost their economy in general, I think that the United States would end up having their hand in it, which would, in the long run, result in more war. And so I don't think that the United States has really done very many truly good or positive or helpful things in the Middle East. I think that the way that we historically have interacted with the Middle East has been via, just exercising all of our power and throwing our weight around. And I think that it's hard because I don't want to say that people that need help, or Syria or any other country that needs help that the United States could potentially help, that we should just turn our backs on them. But I also don't have enough faith in the United States government to say that they would enter a country, do good, and then leave. Yeah. I really don't. And without Trump's willingness to allow refugees into the United States, I think that going there would be the only feasible alternative. But I guess if we weighed all the options, it's like, well, what would be the downside? What are the cons to that? Because when we have our military on the ground in a number of those countries, covertly and overtly, and I think that when we are there, our military exercises whatever desire or will that they have, and it's because we have such a strong military that we're able to go that we're able to put them in these countries, and that we're able to make the demands that we do. And so there are plenty of historical instances where the United States kind of on the face has this like, okay, we're here to help message, but then behind closed doors take advantage of that new alliance. And so I think that it's difficult for this Trump administration because there's so much that's being insinuated about his relationship with Russia. And so if he did go and help Syria, what would the repercussions of that be? What would that mean?
Yeah, and also, Syria is adjacent to a lot of other countries that are themselves having a lot of issues. It's near Iraq, it's near Israel, the Palestine border, and if you've been following the news or just reading about, the Israel-Palestine conflict, there's just already so much tension. And so it's not as easy, I think, as Trump maybe makes it seem, like we could just send a couple of fighter bombs and, bomb someplace, and then that's because it's the Syrian government.
I just playing a video game.
Yeah, and these are civilians. It's not like you're not just gonna attack other soldiers or rebels. There are people in the crossfire, and these people cannot leave because it is too safe. Even in other countries where they have, they say, okay, fine, we have a treaty where for the next 6 hours no one will shoot so that people can leave. No one follows them, so people can't leave. So I don't know. I just feel that the military maybe might be one option, but it's not the only one, and there are consequences to it. And yes, okay, respond to this, and then what? Russia gets angry. Russia does something in retaliation. The rebels who are taking hold of it get angry. There's just so many more. It's not just as easy as a video game, like you said. And I'm just very worried. And meanwhile, you just see these women. It was they're not completely sure what type of chemical it was. They believe it was chlorine based, but what it does to you, it's like you foam at the mouth and you die. And so there is this I saw a video, I think he was a journalist, and he was like crying as he was showing videos because it was like children next to their moms. And they were just like, they died on the spot. And I, in my lifetime, have not, and I think mostly because of ignorance, trying to avoid it, but I just don't really pay attention sometimes to certain news things. I think it's because it might be too overwhelming, because I argue that I have my own issues here at home as an immigrant. But to see those videos, it put a lot of things in retrospect and perspective of just like how in some countries you could be alive one day, and just some people just have it so awful. And how do we help those? How can we? I mean, even countries who want to help, how can we do it? And just kind of adding to this conversation of the world is connected. I argue that the world should help each other, that everyone benefits when everyone else is doing well, I think. And this is just another example of when you let people on their own do things, sometimes stuff happens in those countries and innocent people get hurt. And when we see it, it's too late. And so I'm sure that this is not something that happened overnight, but the U.S. can't just come in and bomb things. Like, that can't be our only way. Yeah. And I think that it's war. People don't play fair. Right. And so just because I'm here in the United States super appalled, this is how people have, I mean, the U.S., I'm sure it has done this all. I mean, you just gave an example of how we can't. And I think ultimately, as we just conclude this section, what I want to emphasize is that we're not only talking about the destruction of a country now, but of its future. Syria has had so many people leave. Central America has had so many people leave. And what does that mean for its future? What does that mean for fertility? What does that mean for marriage? What does that mean for education? What does that mean for the workforce? If no one's there, how can this country rebuild? So what the actions we take on these countries today is going to impact them for years and years to come. And I just think that sometimes we think only in the now, and we don't think about 20, 30, 40 years from now, and how I argue that we're just losing lots of generation of Syrians and lots of generation of Central Americans. And unfortunately, it's going to just change the course of the history for that country, and I don't think for the better.
Something else that's being discussed a lot in popular media and social is Cardi B and her pregnancy, given the fact that her album just dropped. And I was listening to her Breakfast Club interview from, Tuesday, where, she was discussing like what people have said to her, like her management and her label and stuff like that, and even other artists. And I wanted to play a snippet of that interview here, and maybe we can talk about it given our interests in women and gender.
Yeah.
Right.
Prepare for this. I love what Remy Ma said though too, because it is true for women. Men have kids, continue with their career, nothing stops. And for women, it's so different. They try to act like, oh, if you have a baby, it's the height of everything. But it is proof that you can be pregnant, have a baby, and still be at the height of everything.
Yeah, you know what? It just really bothers me. And it disgusts me because I see a lot of women online like, oh, I feel sorry for you. Oh, your career is over. And it's like, why can't I have both? Like, as a woman, why can't I have both? Like, why do I got to choose a career or a baby? Like, why can't I have both?
Yeah, men never have to choose.
Well, those are the people that's rooting against you anyway, though. So they want to see you fail anyway.
And you absolutely can. I mean, you're showing it now. You absolutely positively can.
But it's not even people that, like, not rooting for me. Like, a lot of people around me was concerned. Like, it's like, I don't think it could happen. This never really happens. And it's like, I don't want to wait until I'm 30 something to have a kid. Like, I want my kid now. I want my kid now that I have energy and stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of like, yeah, it's Cardi B. Maybe it's not super duper relevant to like the broader conversations that we have, but I think that what this highlights about women and navigating how to integrate or balance work and family is something that we could discuss. And so, I mean, what do you think?
No, this is something I think about a lot, and I don't think that how are we going to do this? And so I think that sometimes being a woman in my field, academia, and trying to be a professor, it makes me feel the same way. Like, just how I could relate so much to Cardi B, because that's how I felt in my life. And so I'm not a rapper, but she was speaking like it's what happens to all, like, to women.
Yeah.
Do you think that this is something that we're going to see across the board if we asked women in different fields?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the really sucky part too is that I'm not sure if your friend told you where a lot of that negativity or negative energy was coming from, but a lot of the times it's older women that are perpetuating these ideas that you cannot merge the two. That and they frame it as like, I'm looking out for you, that, men in this field are going to judge you, are going to think that you're less serious or less committed to your career because you chose to have a child. And that puts a lot of pressure on women to, like Cardi is saying, wait until later in their life, until they've achieved whatever career success. And that's also hard because success, what success means is so subjective. So who's to say that if she did wait until she was 35, she would have achieved the level of success that she wanted to? That she would be at the point where she's like, okay, how do you know where the cap is, where you're like, okay, I'm successful enough now I'm going to take a break and I'm going to go and have a kid? And then also, how long do you wait after you have your kid to dive back into your career? Because if you're, I think that I'm not really sure how it works with like labels and stuff like that, and how much they are able to dictate like when you need to put out another album. But even going back to academia, or even companies in like major corporations, it's like, okay, maternity leave, 3 months.
Yeah.
You have 3 months with your baby, and then you're back on the job.
Yeah.
And that's hard. That's so hard. Like, why do these companies that are not invested at all in your mothering, in your child's development, get to dictate how much time you get to spend away from work and with your I don't know. And like you're saying, like, most of these companies do not have paternity leave, at least in the United States. Like, that's super rare. And even if they do have paternity leave, the dads can choose, all right, I want to take it, no, I don't. And actually, in academia, a lot of research has shown that dads use the paternity leave as an opportunity to get a leg up and to get more work done without, having to meet certain requirements and deadlines and stuff like that. And that perpetuates and reproduces, gender inequality, because it's like the women, a lot of the mothers are home caring for their child, nursing their child, while the fathers are using that time to work and to get ahead. And that's foul. And so for her to have to deal with that, for her to have to, have that energy directed toward her while she's in the process of putting out an album, like, that's so unfair. And even though we are not gonna play the rest of the clip on here, she also says that Lauryn Hill, I guess, gave her a go ahead, gave her
for her sample.
Yeah, and also told her that, gave her some positive words about her pregnancy and having a child.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, and basically said it's gonna be okay. Because I don't know if you know about Lauryn Hill's one of Lauryn Hill's songs, Zion, where she talks about basically the same thing. She was at the peak of her career, she got pregnant, and everybody, family, friends, label, telling her don't do this, don't do this to yourself, don't do this to your career. Pregnancy was just this scarlet letter. Don't do it, it's gonna mess up everything. And she chose to have her son, and so she told Cardi she's the one or one of the few positive voices saying it's okay, it's gonna be okay, you can still do this. And I bet nobody was saying it to Offset. Nobody's saying oh, don't have this kid.
No.
Yeah.
No. Or it's gonna hurt your career if you have this kid. You won't have as much time to work, because everyone knows that there's more expectation for one parent than the other, even though both are now in the workforce.
Yeah.
So, no, I feel exactly the same way. I'm righteous. I'm angry, but then it's, what do we do? How can we address that? Because or at least I'm seeing it firsthand in academia, where I see that women are making decisions not only about when to have children, but about how many. So kind of talking about like, well, instead of 3, I guess I'll have 2.
Yeah.
And that is also like unfair because I don't think that male students question that. And even if we were to say that being a student is a sacrifice, so if I wanted to have a kid earlier and not do this, and I don't have to be in graduate school, and that's fair. But when other men in graduate school also just have different experiences because they're men, it just makes it seem like it's that much harder for me to be able to accomplish family and career. And like, do I have to choose one, just like Cardi was saying?
I mean, I think that one way of remedying it, at least for us, like when we get to whatever senior level position in whatever career we choose, if we nip those kinds of things in the bud, like if like we need to put an end to older women or more senior women telling younger women not to have a child or to put that off until they've reached a certain level in their career. Because I think that that's where it starts. It's like, if you're in a position of power and you recognize that there's a certain level, there's a certain inequality being perpetuated, I think that you have an obligation, especially if you empathize, especially if you have an awareness, you have an obligation to mitigate that. And if you are if you're just kind of blending in with the culture and, in saying like, well, this is just the way it is, then you're part of the problem. Mm-hmm. You are part of the problem. And I mean, just based on the stuff that I've read and that I've seen and heard, and, not just Cardi, but similar situations, that's what a lot of women do. It's like, well, my hands are tied.
Yeah.
Based on my experience, or when I was your age, or when I was in your position, I waited and I did this and I did that. But it's like, no, how about you push the envelope, you push the boundaries, and you find ways to help women to, better facilitate that process. So if that means, petitioning or, I don't know, going to the head of certain departments of HR or at a university, going to like the dean and saying, I have, women between the ages of 25 and 35, their primary childbearing ages in my department. They want to have children, or they are, in the process of having children, and they're stuck between a rock and a hard place because we have all these deadlines, we have all these really firm requirements that if they take time off, that time off could potentially take away from their ability to meet those deadlines. We need to fix this. Yeah. We need to create some kind of, we need to, I don't know, offer some like daycare or, some kind of services. Like, I think, actually, I don't know if it was at our school or was it at our school or a different, maybe it was at the school that I was at before. But basically they had like a maternity or a breastfeeding room.
Oh, okay.
I forgot what that's called, but basically a room where mothers could go in and either breastfeed or like pump. Mm-hmm. And then they found out that some men were in there taking naps. And it's like, what? Why would you think that that's okay?
Of course you would think, jeez.
It is, it's just like, and nobody's doing or saying anything about this, and that puts additional pressure on the mother to, put these men in their place and say, hey, like, get the hell out of this room where I'm supposed to be pumping. Like, that is such a ridiculous invasion of privacy. Like, why do you think, if you don't go take your ass to your car and take a nap like a normal person, why would you see that this is the maternity room and think, oh, okay, it's gonna be quiet in here, let me go in here and nap?
Oh my god. So I just, part of me wishes that would happen, like, to me,
so you could go off.
Well, I don't know, just to see what I would do. I can't imagine trying to use the room for something and seeing someone in there taking a nap.
I would for sure go off, because it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous, like that. And then, even having a maternity room is something so small and minor. Like, that's not even a huge effort on the part of the university. So if that is being like taken away or, threatened, that's a problem.
Yeah.
We just have, there's so many things that need to need to be changed. But
they could do better, definitely do better. And specifically, I think those are small things we can address. At least in our space, I think more openness about the fact that there are women who are going to want to have kids or having kids so that they don't have to, because sometimes it just feels like someone went away and then had a baby.
Yeah.
And it's like, are we still in the 1800s
where women have a secret? Like, I mean, we have people in our program who have had kids, and it's like you just never get to see them because it's like this thing that has to be hidden at home, and it can't interfere with your work, because if it does, then you're not serious, you're not committed. Like, I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's a problem, and it's one that I definitely see myself evolving into someone that is open to pushing boundaries, and is willing to bump heads with whomever if it means that I will make the smallest bit of change, even if I don't get to benefit from it. Letting people know that this is not right. The way that you're making, women feel, and I mean, the feelings are important. So it's not just like, oh my God, your feels, you're like all in your emotions or whatever. But it's like, no, that really influences the decisions that women make. And even though we talk a lot about, even though that we know that the notion of the biological clock is a social construct and yada, 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 there are real health consequences to pushing off, childbearing. Yeah. I mean, it's that's a reality. And that's a reality that we need to, I mean, even for men, like, I think that there's there isn't a whole bunch of research, but there is new research that shows that there are consequences even to men's, reproductive capacities the longer that they wait or the older that they are. Like, there is a reduction in your sperm count, just like there's a reduction in your egg count. Like, it's a real thing that we need to, I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a baby older if that's what you want. If you're being forced to do it,
or push, even pushed is bad. It doesn't have to be, even some people still feel like I can choose when to have it, but what's your range of what you're choosing? Is that really, like you said, what you wanted?
Yeah. And I mean, people these days are working until they're dead. So I don't understand why we're acting like they don't have time to reach the
That's
pinnacle
true.
of their career.
That's true. Yeah,
you got time.
So I strongly suggest that you wake the fuck up.
Now for the What's Being Slept On segment. For this week, in the What's Being Slept On segment, we'll be discussing being woke and what that means for different groups, for different types of people, and what people think about it in general. So, Zelma, what would you say being woke means?
Well, before we even had this, the idea for this segment, I just thought being woke was being aware of issues that impact me and my communities. But then I realized that definition is too vague. It doesn't really explain what I need to be woke about. So initially, I guess I just thought it had to do with race stuff. But now, after you and I have been kind of talking, I think that it's more than race stuff that I am quote-unquote woke about. There's lots of gender inequality. So I think maybe for me, being woke is just being aware of and educated about inequality at large. So whether that be gender, race, or sexual orientation. But that was not the definition that I had, every day before thinking about it for this podcast. What about you? Did you have a very defined way of thinking about it?
Well, I think that maybe the way that I think about it has changed over time. Just because, so when it started out, it was like a hashtag, hashtag stay woke at the end of certain types of posts. And so I thought about it as something that on the face, or that was seemingly neutral, but that when you dug, if you were awake enough, if you were aware enough or sensitive enough, you would recognize the implicit bias, whatever the kind of bias is, whether it be race-based or gender or sexuality, whatever. So it was about, I think that there is, I don't know, it requires you to be aware, and then I think it requires you to be sensitive to particular things. And I think over time, it has gotten, I don't know, it has turned into something super crazy, because I think that people kind of attack on every front, and if you don't stand beside them and attack, it's like, oh, you're not woke up. You're not woke enough. Like, you're, asleep when it comes to certain things, or you might be aware of the issue, but you don't have our level of sensitivity. Like, there's something that you're missing. So I think now what being woke has evolved into is this really, I guess, hyper awareness, hyper sensitivity to anything that could be viewed as kind of like as racist or prejudiced or biased in any way. So I guess with that, like, I'm wondering, because it seems like now the phase that we're in is the idea of being too woke. So I've heard a lot of people say, make jokes like, oh, those people over there are too woke, they need a nap. Or like, I'll say, I've said sometimes when I'm kind of irritated with people that, not irritated with people that I know necessarily, but things that I see like on social, and I'm like, oh, those people need some sleep. Like, they are just way too woke. So, I mean, do you think that, we talked about one thing that you want to talk about is J Balvin, and so with that, because I'm wondering if there is a such thing as being too woke.
Yeah.
Like, if you can, where is that line? Where do we draw the line? Where do we say, okay, now you're being too sensitive? Like, maybe this isn't that bad.
And I think this particular topic is why I cling so much to, being woke-ish.
Yeah.
Because, I love J Balvin. I went to his concert when he came here. I was that person that was blocking everyone's view sitting behind me because I was dancing on my feet the whole time. Well, most of the time, because I'm not gonna lie, there's some of those slow songs, and I'm not gonna be awkward. But I loved him as an artist, and I really love him as a person. So this story that I'm about to share really hit me hard. Okay, so J Balvin was on a YouTube vlog, and they were playing the game. In the article, they call it Kiss, Marry, Kill, and he said that they were playing 2 rounds, and he had recently worked with 2 women on a song, so he chose both of them to marry in each round, and said that the default for the other women they gave him, he just assigned one to kill. And so one of the women he was asked about was Rihanna, and he mentioned that he would not marry her because Rihanna isn't a good woman to marry just to fool around. And I mean, that comment irritated me because I thought it was sexist, just again reinforcing that, first of all, he does not know Rihanna. He does not know anything about her, and for him to even say anything negative about her was problem number 1 for me. Problem number 2 is this assumption that based on an image that he thinks about her as being quote unquote sexual, made her not good enough for something, and in this case marriage. So I thought that was sexist. But I myself did not see that as a racist comment, and a lot of people dragged him. A lot of black women dragged him and said that had racial undertones, that her not being good enough to marry and only to fool around was kind of referring to this hypersexualization of black women and was an anti-black comment. But I didn't see that as racist. And so I was like, am I not on the woke train? Am I just being biased because of my love for J Balvin? And so I just wanted to see what you thought. Did you think this was offensive?
I think that this game in general is offensive because we, hold marriage to a really high regard, right? So anything that's not marriage is offensive. So even to be put in the fuck category is offensive. So I did not see it as racist. I saw it more as sexist. Like him, I think that what he's highlighting is how Rihanna presents herself as very sexual and very sexualized, and that because of that, she would not be marriage material, which I do think is problematic. But I think that That's a position that I've heard a lot of men, like celebrities, have. Even women, actually. There are tons of women that talk about Rihanna and them wanting to have sex with her and all of that. And so, she's been mentioned in a ton of songs and all of that. But I think that maybe because he's not black himself, that maybe they were these super woke black women were suggesting that it could have racial undertones because, like, if he was a black man, I don't think that they would have said that. But I think that what I would have done if I were him in this position is that I would have just passed on the game in general. I would have just been like, you know what, I'm going to opt out of participating in this game because other than marriage, there is no other category that you can put someone in that they could not take offense to. And even marriage, I think that saying like, this is not a good woman to marry. Like, so what is a good woman to marry? What does a woman that is marriageable look like? What kind of traits does she have? What kind of characteristics and all that stuff? So you could even take offense to that depending on what his definition is, what kind of characteristics he's attributing to these different categories. But with that, so also when we're talking about if you can be too woke, a couple weeks ago, Heineken was under fire for their quote-unquote terribly racist light beer commercial. And so when I was hearing people talk about this, I was also like, am I not woke enough? Like, are these people woker than me? Is there something that I'm missing? Because at the time when I heard people talking about it, I was under the impression that there were a lot of people at a bar, some of whom were black and darker skin, and then some who were fairer skinned, and that they were all waiting for a beer, and that the bartender bypassed all of these darker skinned people to send the beer to the person with the lighter complexion. That was the way it was described to me, and then I watched the clip, and that is not the case. And so, but even after watching the clip, I did not find it offensive, and I am sitting here as someone with darker skin, and so I was wondering, like, am I missing something? And I think that I am sensitive to a lot of things when it comes to colorism, when it comes to racism, and the fact that this didn't bother me, I was like, what am I missing? I tried to find a way to look at it and be like, oh yeah, this is problematic, like they should have done X, Y, and Z. I think that they were actually trying to diversify the cast of this commercial, and it went wrong. Mm-hmm. But we were talking about, so what I do think that this commercial, the problems that I do think this commercial has is that I do think it's sexist. So I don't think that it's racist, but I do think it's sexist in that the woman at the beginning, we don't know, like, she's kind of racially ambiguous. So the woman at the beginning is looking at the wine glass, like maybe she wants the wine, and then the bartender sees her looking at the wine and decides, no, like, let me send her this low-calorie drink because, maybe she's worried about her physique and she might not want to drink all the calories that are in this wine, so I have a better option for her. And I think that that's sexist because that's, like, women are told all the time how many calories they should intake, what their bodies should look like. Their bodies are policed. Yeah. Constantly.
And it was a male bartender.
Yes, a male bartender. So essentially what the commercial is doing is policing the woman's body. I don't necessarily know that there was as much concern for what color that body was, but I could be wrong. I'm open to, what these other perspectives. The perspectives that I heard so far have not convinced me that there were, like, racial implications, but maybe.
Yeah, someone told me about the commercial in a way that was like, this is wrong, I thought this was racist, and then I saw it, and I didn't catch the wine thing, so that was the thing that you pointed out that now I see, kind of like, yeah, why specifically the woman, why specifically white wine, why specifically lighter is better, and if it's not about calories. And I just think that the placement of the black people was weird. Yeah. Like, it was just, they were all one after another. There was a black guy playing the saxophone or something, or the guitar, playing the guitar, like, in this random bar. I just thought that the three, they, like you said, like, maybe they were trying to diversify, but they just go to their go-tos, which is like, oh, musician, trendy model, and maybe they didn't have someone of color on their marketing board who was like, maybe we should mix it up and have a couple white people be passed too. but I'm not sure if I was as offended as well. But I also wasn't offended about J Balvin, so that's when I'm like, sometimes I don't know. Sometimes to me things are clear. I feel that things are racially, there's some racial undertones. But then it's hard when we even disagree amongst ourselves what is that and what isn't, what's offensive and what's not, making it even more difficult to figure out if you're woke. And if I don't find this offensive but other people do, does that mean I'm not woke anymore? Or I'm not, can you take my woke card? Or it's just, I think it's, trying to find a spectrum. Is there a spectrum of woke-ish where can you be like a lower end of the spectrum in some areas but super high in others? For example, can a white person who's more a white woman who feels very particular issues of gender inequality be really woke about gender inequality issues but not as woke about race issues? Yeah. I feel like it's a very complicated topic, which I'm glad we're trying to unpack, but one that seemed as it's not as complicated as it is. Like, woke is just woke, and I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that it is, but my question, I guess, stems from that, but because I'm wondering if not being woke or aware or sensitive or protective of people in one area takes away from you being woke in another. So I know a lot of black men who I would call quote unquote woke, who are very anti-racism, but who are also homophobic. And so does that take away from their anti-racist work or efforts? And I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
Because I think, we were talking about earlier, and we don't have to go into this a ton, but right now there is a push for more gender neutral language. So changing pronouns rather than, her and him and he and she, using they and them and, different variations of that. And I don't feel very passionate about that. But I think that I consider myself woke, and I say woke-ish just because, I guess maybe my upbringing, not necessarily having anything to do with my parents, but because of where I grew up and who my friends are. And I think that I kind of am trying to balance the righteous and the ratchet, and I'm not willing to like turn the door or close the door on trap music and all of this stuff that I know is like degrading to women and all of that. So I would say, in the fact that I've had conversations about this with some of my friends, is it okay to be woke? Is it okay to be anti-racist, to be anti-sexism, but then shaking your ass in a club to, I don't know, tip drill, or some old school, I don't know, like different trap music and stuff like that. Like, is that okay? Are you at the same time like saying that the oppression of women or degradation of women is okay? So I think that woke is, it's a hard line to toe. I don't know who is woke across the board.
I don't. And one of the things, like, I like Charlemagne.
Yeah.
And
me too.
I listen to, but sometimes he says things that are homophobic or sexist, and
definitely.
It's kind of like, well, do I discount his, the things I do like about him because he says these things? Or like J Balvin, I feel like he's done a lot for the community. Maybe some people don't, but he also raps about just having sex with someone you don't know, and how sex is like a safari, and I dance to that. Yeah. But does that make me not woke? Because it could be like just once again seeing women as sexual objects. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's so hard because everything is, even I say problematic things, maybe not out in public, maybe in private, I will say problematic things, and I think that everybody has the capacity to be problematic, and I think that it would just be hard, and it would probably be really boring to reject all of that. I think that we have to have levels, like there has to be a hierarchy of need, so if there are certain things that are like, okay, this is less offensive, like it's problematic but less problematic than this other thing, I think that it's okay to weigh those things and to not be just excelling across the board, because some of it is exhausting. Like, if I think that that's the main reason why I don't feel the passion about the pronouns, is because it would be exhausting to try to correct myself every time I interact with someone. Now, I am, and I do, if I am interacting with someone who is transgender and they refer to themselves with whatever pronoun, if that is the pronoun that I'm going to use as well. But when it comes to, when I'm talking about anybody, people that are not transgender, and referring to them as they rather than he or she or her or him, that just is so much work. And I just have so many things that I have to think about and that I have to deal with on a daily basis that I just don't want to add that thing to my, and some people that might listen to that and think that's problematic. Mm-hmm. And then that would be fair if that's something that you feel very passionately about. Do you think that, like, if you're super conscious when it comes to, like, race issues, do you think that means that you should be equally as conscious when it comes to gender inequality or, like, sexism, homophobia? Or do you think that that's an expectation from people?
I think it's more an expectation than, I just think for me, let me speak for myself. For me, it feels like, as a person who's part of a racial minority, or ethnic minority, as a person who has family that are, undocumented and is an immigrant, all those things force me to have to address and encounter different issues. And so I feel that I have to be woke in all those areas just because I needed to survive. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't feel as much as a choice, but like, man, if I want to help my mom out with this immigration issue, I have to learn about it. In order to learn about it, I have to learn, like, what's going on. And so you
have to care about it.
Yeah. So I feel like I think as a person, I, always strive to work on inequality. Like, those are things that I'm very passionate about, aside, I think, just from my background. But my background also causes me to have actual things that impact me. So even if I wasn't a student, if I worked in an office, like, I would still have to care about these things because my mom might get, detained because she doesn't have the proper documentation. So it feels like, for me, at least for me and for people I know and for other people, you're kind of forced to be woke in all these different areas. I mean, do you feel that way? Do you feel like you have different areas that are pulling you?
I think that maybe because I do know people who are Black or who are, minorities across a lot of different hierarchies, who are not woke, who could care less about social and political issues. I think that I kind of am leaning toward you aren't necessarily obligated to be woke side of things. Mm-hmm. But I do think that it is an expectation, because I am often disappointed when I'm trying to have conversations with people that I assume are kind of somewhat like-minded. Like, you don't have to be as passionate as me about these things. But if you are just, like, you don't care at all, that is a little bit disappointing to me. Because I think that being woke is tied to kind of like a fight for equality. So you're not just woke or conscious or caring about these things just for the fun of it. It's like, no, I want to see change. You want to see social change. And so if you are not woke, if you are not conscious, if you don't care about inequality, then to me that equates to you not caring about whether or not things change. Yeah. And that, I think, is problematic, because I think you need to be concerned about your own well-being, about the well-being, I think, of your people, of your community, however you define that community. If you know that there is inequality, I think that you should care about that inequality, particularly if you are a member of a group that is oppressed. But I had a question for you, because I was thinking as you were talking, I wonder if quote-unquote wokeness is burdensome. Do you think that, kind of like the saying, ignorance is bliss. Yeah. Do you think that it's easier to, like, live life without worrying or caring or being invested in these issues?
Yeah, I mean, my research interest is health, so I specifically read about health differences incidences, and what we find a lot is that there are just higher rates of things, incidence rate, in some groups than others. So for example, like hypertension, like we know that African Americans have some of the highest rates of hypertension, which is really bad. It increases rates of stroke, it increases likelihood of heart disease, like it's strain on your body. And so they're trying to figure out why we're seeing this. And so they test different things and look at different things. And time again, when they control for different variables, there's things that are correlated with higher rates of hypertension and things that are correlated with increased stress. And that's experiences of discrimination, experiences of harassment, experiences of racism. And it's hard sometimes to measure, but when you even if we talk about statistics beyond people trying to come at me about, well, how do you know this? It's if we look at statistics and we look at similar people, and when we control for things that puts them on an equal level field, what we find is that experiences of discrimination, harassment, racism, increased stress, all that equates to higher rate of certain things, and in this case, hypertension. But I'm sure if we examined further, we would find that it's linked to a lot of things. I mean, stress is bad for your body. Anxiety is bad for your body. You're constantly in a state of hyper awareness, and over time, that's just not good for you. And so in doing studies that ask you, like, what stresses you out? When have you ever encountered this? Because they have measures of stress. Like, they can quantify stress and compare what situation is more stressful and say, like, okay, divorce is as stressful as this and this, because that's what we do as social scientists. We try to quantify as much as we can, especially in health. And even if, you say it's not a perfect measure, like, we're finding just similar patterns of groups of people who are describing incidences of hate or discrimination, and not just African Americans, but other groups, Muslims, like minority groups, are just, we're seeing that it takes a toll on their bodies. And, so it's not just simply an identity thing or this is my belief or this is my calling. Like, even if you don't care, like, there are things that are happening to your body just being in this, in this environment and in this contact. And so, I don't know, I feel that it's definitely something worth examining. And for us, specifically my experience as an academic, but also as a Latina, I look at these rates and I look at this and I'm like, that's not just numbers. Like, that's my mom, that's her friends. Right. Yeah. Like, I just think about her life and the stressfulness. And when she calls me and tells me about how someone treated her badly because she wasn't speaking English correctly, like that, puts you in an uncomfortable situation that increases your stress, increases your anxiety, and an accumulation of those experiences add up. That's
so true. And I hadn't even thought about it in that way. Like, when I was thinking about the burden of being woke, we can also, like, you bringing up the health ramifications of that, like, so the awareness that you might be treated differently because you are non-white, like you are a minority. I think that is, like you're saying, like, the stress of that is very real. And I mean, I think even there are a lot of non-social scientists who study health, like we could say doctors or people in the medical field that have this idea that mortality rates, in terms of, like, let's frame it in terms of, let's say, like, Black women and mortality rates linked to breast cancer. Right? So the notion is that Black women have higher rates of mortality that are linked to their instances of onset breast cancer, and they think that is tied to their race, to their racial identity, but in actuality what it's tied to is racial inequality in terms of access to medical care. And so if you, for instance, are a white person or a person that has more privilege or access to more resources, and you go to the doctor frequently because your insurance allows for that and pays for that, then you might be able to catch certain, like, diseases in the onset, very early stages, where they are curable. But if you are someone that does not have health insurance, or the health insurance is very poor, then you might not catch your cancer until, the later stages, 3 or 4, where it's less likely to be cured and you are more likely to die from it. And so when you're actually relating racial identity or category to the frequency of mortality due to whatever disease, it might actually be more beneficial to look at, access to insurance or discrimination or, like you said, racism. So even diseases like sickle cell where there are higher rates among Black people, like that could probably be traced to some kind of social inequality if we actually paid more attention to it. So it might not just be the burden of being woke, but just the burden of being aware that racism exists, or that discrimination exists, or that inequality and access to resources exists. Privilege comes in a lot of different forms, and oftentimes we aren't considering all the different ways that privilege can manifest. Like, it's not just about income, it's not just about wealth, it's not just about class. It's like, if I could potentially have a job that pays me well, but maybe, there are variations in like tenure or what kind of positions get access to health insurance. Like adjunct professors, they don't make a ton of money, but they make some money, but they don't get health insurance. They don't get the same insurance coverage that full professors or tenure track professors get. That's an inequality. Are we going to say that adjunct professors who have PhDs are lacking in privilege? Maybe not, but there is still an inequality there. That I think is important and worth highlighting. And it's actually also important to note that majority of adjunct professors are women. And so it's like, so if you were to, zoom out and look at what that means, it's that women in academia, or not just women, but also mothers. So mothers in academia are less likely to have health insurance than men. And that is because they are disproportionately represented in adjunct or a lower ranking professor, I don't know, what is it? The lower ranks of the professor of academia. And so, we can think of all the different consequences and ramifications of that. And then you zoom out even further and you might see that women in academia have higher instances of different, health issues and stuff like that. Because maybe that could be linked to the fact that, they are overrepresented in the lower ranks, and that also links back to the fact that their choice, I don't know if I want to use the word choice, but their decision to have a child negatively affected their ability to, achieve tenure or to be promoted. So it has all these, it could just, the inequality consequences of the inequality go on and on and on and on. It's... it's crazy.
It is. But to know about it and to be educated about it allows us to be able to address those things. So because I know that, maybe some groups of people encounter higher rates of not only physical, issues, but mental distress, then I might want to engage in more activities and more things that take care of myself, that take care of my mental health, because I may need it more, and that it's okay to say, wow, it's really hard and stressful and overwhelming sometimes to encounter the things that I encounter. So maybe I can talk to someone and find support. And so hopefully, us knowing about it, we can address it and we can do something about it, because, we're both academics, but we also, we're studying the people we know and we talk to. And so it's a whole different field when you have that investment.
So do you think that there is a cost to not being woke as a minority? So we can talk, specifically about people of color, or maybe even gender minorities or sexual minorities. Are these people, I think that there's one we talked about, there's more of an expectation on them, which we could say means that there is more of a burden to that level of consciousness. But because there's more of a burden, some people might reject it. Some people might, it's like living life is hard enough. So maybe I don't even want to think about racism. I don't want to think about discrimination. I don't want to think about sexism or homophobia. But do you think that there is a cost to that?
I'm thinking socially, and then by whom? Because, and it's different. And I'm one of those people that I think that sexism, racism, heterosexism are different. They're both, oppressive things, but I don't like comparing things like that. But sometimes I think that there are some things that maybe aren't as easily fit into packages as others. And so I don't know. I think that, and then sometimes I hear someone you told me the experience of talking to people and being disappointed when they kind of either didn't agree or had really crazy views.
Or just didn't care at all.
Or just
had no
care.
thoughts.
Had
no
not
thoughts.
care. And then I sometimes have bad reactions to that. Sometimes I'm like, really? Like, how? And then, but is that fair? Like, isn't everyone entitled? I think, like, isn't everyone entitled to just, like, it's their life. Like, if that's not what they want to put the focus, like, as long as you're not actively, you know, stopping my issues, then is that okay? Should I just let it go? Even if they are people from my own communities?
Yeah.
Do you think, like, that's okay?
I mean, I have a hard time because I have friends that, you know, are very homophobic. And even if they aren't super homophobic, they don't have a problem with using certain words, certain epithets that I wouldn't say that I personally find them offensive, but if you, again, are a member of a minority group and there are, you know, like, say, racial epithets that I don't want a white person directing to me, then I don't think it's right. I don't think it's right for me to have a problem with that, but then to turn around and use an epithet towards someone who is gay, you know, or whatever. Like, I think that we should, just as easily as I'm offended by things, I should be offended on behalf of someone else who is, you know, maybe not equally or as marginalized, but who experiences any kind of marginalization. Like, I think that that's only fair, because I think that we are all minorities, which means that we have low numbers. And so if those people have to, like, if we are all only fighting on our own behalf, we would never get anything done. You know, just like we talked about last week, allyship, it's super important as far as this is concerned too. And so I think I don't think that you can be like, okay, well, you know, my only minority status is race, and that's the only thing I care about. And so every other thing, like, I can be sexist, I can be, you know, classist, I can be xenophobic, I can be homophobic. No, I think that it's important for us to, if we want other people to advocate for us, when maybe we're not around or we're not capable for whatever reason of advocating on our own behalf, I would like to hope that my friends who are aware and who care about my experiences would advocate for me when I'm not there, you know, like my white friends or whatever. Like, I think that it's important to, so when even though I am heterosexual, if I hear someone being homophobic, I'm gonna say something, because I would also expect, not I don't know, I guess that sounds kind of bad, where it's like, I'm only doing this because I expect it from other people, but I would like to think that we are all, as minorities, kind of a little bit unified. You know, I know that there's a lot of racism in the gay community. That's another conversation. So I'm not gonna say that I fully expect all gay men or whoever to advocate for me and to be, you know, out there marching and, you know, supporting Black Lives Matter and all of that, but that's what I am gonna do, and that's what I kind of would hope that people would do, even though I don't, you know, I'm not really expecting it. I'm not gonna hold my breath.
Well, then how do you think that we actually, for those of us who do, you know, consider ourselves woke or woke-ish, how do we incorporate that in our lives? One, in a way that's not unhealthy, and two, in a way that's effective.
I don't know. I think that's hard. And I think it's really hard as women, because I think that it's acceptable, socially acceptable for men to be outspoken, for men to be direct, for men to speak up, for men to be, you know, I don't know like how to describe it, but I think that when women, particularly women of color, are loud or outspoken or maybe a little bit combative or pushing back on things, it is read negatively. You know, it's read as, you know, being angry or hostile, or, you know, just all in all, you know, all of the negative terms that you can link to it. You know, so if I am trying to incorporate, you know, being woke into my everyday life, if that requires me to push back against something that someone has said, it could, a lot of times they miss what I'm saying and just hear, you know, the way that I'm saying it, or it's about my delivery and my demeanor and all of that stuff. So if I'm passionate, then you're gonna hear that passion in my voice, but depending on who I'm talking to, they might miss the message and just feel attacked. Like, oh, you're attacking me because you think this way and I think differently, and oh, you don't respect the difference in my thoughts. And it's like, no, it's not just about difference, it's about the consequences of that difference. So if I know that you are not woke when it comes to racism, then I can't depend on you or rely on you to defend me when you hear one of your friends or one of your family members or something saying something out of line. Like, you know, so I don't know, I think it's hard, and I think that wokeness is received differently depending on who's delivering the message. You know, I mean, what do you think?
I don't know, because I'm thinking, like, I mean, if we only think about the stage that we are in our lives, like, that is, I think, influences how we are woke. Yeah. So once we're older, I mean, I feel like sometimes when I speak to people who are from a different generation or grew up in a different, even in my instance, a different context, a different country, sometimes I'm like, okay, I understand, Mom, why you don't feel the need to say these things when people say things, because your focus is, your experience as a person is so different than mine.
You mean like to challenge when people
or just to be like, you know, in her experience, like, she came here illegally and she came here like in the river swimming. Like, she just tells me of things that she's encountered and seen, and I'm like, that's some real shit. Like, she's encountered real, like, what I'm protesting against, like, she actually experienced it. So I'm gonna respect her when she's like, I did my time, like, I'm just, you know, I'm a citizen now, I want to go to work, I feel my heart goes out to people, but I gotta go to work, this is what I gotta do, and I can't sit there and judge her and say, like sometimes when she doesn't vote, and it's not because she doesn't want to, it's because she has a job that she doesn't, like, she really can't tear away from her job to go vote, even though, yes, people say it's illegal for your employer not to. Yeah, but there are jobs where, like, they may not fire you, but you'll get in trouble and eventually, like, might get let go. And so I can't look at her and say, Mom, you're not woke to immigrant issues because you didn't vote for this person, because, you know, I just feel like it's just different. I have different expectations. I see it differently from them. So then I think, what is, you know, so are there different expectations for different people who've experienced things?
Damn, like, so what I'm hearing in what you're saying, kind of implicitly, and it's, I don't know, it's like making me feel away, because I'm like, is being woke a privilege? Like, is having the capacity, like the time, is having the time to be woke? Because we, you know, and we won't say any names, but I think we were kind of told something very similar by a senior level faculty person really recently, that, like, we're privileged, you know? And so I think if your mom, and I know that there are a lot of people that are in very similar positions that just don't have that, you know, their heart is there, but they don't have the time. Like, they're busy, they're doing all of these different things. And so I'm wondering if us having the ability, whether it be, you know, the freedom of speech, the freedom to be able to speak our minds and, you know, post about it or talk about it at school and all of this stuff, like, I think that might be a privileged position, or having the time, having the flexibility in our schedule to act on being woke or to act on our passions. I think that might be a privilege that a lot of people can't afford. And so maybe that's actually changing the way that I think about how we measure wokeness. You know, so if we think about people whose, you know, the only way that they can kind of express how they feel about things is to post about it online or to talk about it, you know, using different outlets, but that they can't actually go out and have their boots on the ground fighting for the cause, that might actually be a consequence of their real life, everyday life obligations, and not necessarily a lack of, like, how much they care or, you know, how passionate they feel about it or how much they empathize with, you know, the cause.
Yeah, no, I mean, and this is just recent revelations. Like, as we're preparing for this podcast, and I talk to my mom, and she checks me on things, and I'm like, oh man, like, you just, you know. And so I think that maybe woke is not a solid thing. It's something that I think changes as you grow. It changes as you move. It changes in different levels, and so I think that's why our podcast is so, to me, appropriate, because if you're just kind of like woke-ish, because life doesn't allow you to really fully do, you know, what you want to do all the time, and especially if you come from different communities. And so I just feel like, I don't know, it looks different, and it's different, and it changes. And that's probably a really unsatisfying way to, you know, to talk about it, but maybe that's just really reflective of how complicated and changing and unpredictable life is.
Yeah, no, I in thinking about wokish, I remembered that there was this tweet that I saw that I was like, am I not woke enough? And I know we talked about it at the beginning of the, in our first segment, but I thought it was like so fitting with what we're talking about today. But yeah, so I had seen this tweet that I was like, this is a reminder that I am just woke-ish, because some of these super duper woke folks, like, it goes over my head. I'm like, what are you what am I missing? There's something that I'm missing in translation. So the tweet says, "Dear caretakers of children, stop telling kids, I don't care who started it. You're teaching children to ignore unequal power balances. That leads to legitimate belief in things like reverse racism, misandry, heterophobia, etc. You're teaching children that it's wrong to retaliate when they are wronged. Who started it is very, very relevant." So I was just like, wait, what? Like, I was with it for the first two lines. Like, I understood you're teaching children to ignore unequal power balances.
Oh, no, you lost me there.
Yeah.
I didn't.
I could understand that, I don't know. Like, so I have two younger siblings, and they're a year apart. The youngest is a boy. And so growing up, I saw a lot of how even when he was wrong, my sister would be punished because it was like, oh, you're 1 year older, and he's a little boy. Little boys are rougher. Little boys are this. Little boys are that. So it didn't matter who was actually wrong. It's like, no, you should know better. Like, you're older, you're a girl, girls are more mature, all of these other things that I found, kind of problematic. And that I think, after talk, because I was really opinionated as a child, kind of how I am now. And I think that over time, the way that I explained it to my parents kind of, made more sense. And it was something that they paid attention to, because me as the oldest, I'm like, no, that's unfair. Like, he is the one that was wrong. And it's unfair for her to be punished and told that she should know better because of all these things. And so I do think that is teaching kids that inequality is okay. But I don't necessarily think that translates to homophobia, to, reverse racism, to them thinking that all of these other things that I think are inequalities, but not in the same way. Like, those are on a much, much, much higher and graver level. Like, I don't think that we can conflate those two. And I actually think that the tweet is kind of dangerous, saying that, by maybe raising your kids, I don't want to use the word incorrectly, but maybe, pushing some maybe seemingly unfair ideas on your kids can lead them to feel different ways. It might hurt their feelings and stuff like that, but I don't think that they're internalizing it and then unleashing it on how they think about other inequalities.
And not like that specifically? Like, when you talk, I was like, okay, we're going to talk about what translates to racism and homophobia. Arguments between kids? No. People being racist is like...
racism is racism. Like,
tweet about that.
Yeah.
Like, you got a point, kind of, but...
Yeah, no, there was a lot that was conflated there. And so I think even, among the people that consider themselves woke or consider themselves progressive and, concerned about inequality and all of the things related to it, you can still miss a lot and still not understand a lot. Like,
yeah.
I don't know. That tweet just really bothered me. Like, I was like, what?
Yeah,
what is being missed here? But, so, my last question to you, which I think that we have kind of talked about a little bit, is, your thoughts on, or whether or not you think it's difficult to be woke among non-woke folks. So, like, family, friends, partners, spouses. Like, how do you deal with that? Or if they're woke but not on the same level. Like, say, this person that tweeted this was your friend or your spouse. And they were presenting it to you, and they're like, Selma, you need to be passionate about this. You need to, tell parents about the unequal power balances perpetuated between siblings and how that can result in racism later in life.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's hard because, so I know people who voted for Trump, and I'm still friends with them. I know, I would not have imagined this, and we actually had conversations that were like, hey, put it on the table, you voted for Trump. And
so they told you? They just willingly...
No, they didn't, it wasn't something that they hid. They're kind of more about with the party people. So, and I had wrestled about like how, and so it's different because I had some people who I know that are that are family, that not necessarily voted for Trump, but like don't care about a lot of things.
Yeah.
And then I have friends, and so I view them differently. So starting with family, I can't do anything. I just like don't talk about it. I don't talk about things. At dinner I will not bring stuff up. I'm not gonna, I told my mom I'm doing a podcast, but I'm not gonna tell her like all the things I talk about. But with friends I will. I'll be more open, and it's uncomfortable sometimes. Yeah. And so with friends I pick my battles. I say, okay, I am going to be super, super vocal about this one thing, but when you don't denounce things that this person does, I guess I just can't. I'm just not gonna have a Facebook war with you. I'm not gonna have a text war, because and that's, I think, in my networks what has been difficult about still like not having different levels of just different political opinions and different people who support different things. So I am not in a bubble like in my networks. Sometimes I'm like one of the few people who actually believes the way that I feel. And so sometimes it's difficult for me to know what's the best way. And also like for my energy, like to be able to have all these constant arguments. And I did initially start every conversation, every issue, I'm going to make it. And what I learned is that people stopped listening to me. And unfortunately, it's like if we want to get conversations with people who are across the aisle, people who you want to ask and say, okay, would you vote for him again? Like, let's not forget, like, we still have another uphill of, like, let's not get this person reelected. And so if I can talk to you and say, okay, why did you vote for that person? This is why I didn't. Do you still think you... And I've had conversations like, do you think that was okay? Like with the Charlottesville, there are good people on both sides. I asked and said, do you think that was okay? And they're like, no, of course not. So it's like, okay, like we can have conversations. We have to figure this out. And so for me, it's more how I navigate it is I use strategies. What worked in the past and what didn't. With this person, they allow me to be more vocal. With this person, it's only sharing stuff on Facebook. With this person, I can be direct. With this person, I kind of have to say, well, in school, this was so frustrating. Like, it's just, I found I have to use different strategies and navigate different things. And so, I don't know, like, but that's my experience in having to just share and explain just such different viewpoints. Do you have people that think differently, voted differently in your life that you have these conversations around?
Well, I don't think that I know anyone who voted for Trump. Like I have one conservative Republican uncle. Oh. And I talked to him before the election about what he thought about him. When Trump initially announced that he was, going to run, I had a conversation with that uncle and what are your thoughts? And I was really surprised that he said, no, I think he's an idiot. Like, I don't have any intention of voting for him. But aside from voting, I do have people that I regularly interact with and have conversations with that don't care about a lot of the issues that I care about, that don't think that, like, it's like, well, if it doesn't affect me, then I don't need to be concerned about it, Yeah. And I mean, which doesn't bother me. What bothers me, I think, the most is when that leads to them making decisions that could potentially negatively impact them or, people who are marginalized. Like, for instance, if I had a friend who maybe, who like say didn't care about certain issues, but then went and say that they happened to be on a jury. They had jury duty and they were selected to serve on jury in a case where, they could ultimately put away some black kid for, have him tried as an adult or something like that for some BS. If they voted in favor of that, that would be a problem. So it's like my big issue is not like, okay, what goes on in your head on a daily basis? Like, okay, that's fine. But if the consequence of that translates into you doing something that could negatively impact somebody that's in my community or another marginalized community unfairly, then that's when I have an issue. And so I think, even again, going back to what we talked about last week, if you are, not necessarily an ally and you don't identify with that, but then you're doing things that are harming me or harming my community, then that's where I have the issue. Like, you don't have to be out there marching. You don't have to be posting all the statuses on Facebook. You don't have to be blacking out your profile picture. You know, you don't have to be doing those things. But so you don't have to do positive things, but you also can't do negative things. Like, you have to be neutral on both sides. Yeah. You know, so I think that that's how I feel about family and friends. Like, I think that, you know, my parents are super supportive of my choices and, you know, like, my decision to, you know, do this podcast and to talk about my social and political views. But do I think that they necessarily would make the same choice, or that they feel the same? Maybe not. But I also don't think that they're going to do anything to shut this podcast down. Yeah, you know, or to flag this podcast or whatever. Like, I think that would be something different, you know? So it's like, you gotta be neutral. Like, you can't lean, you know, more on one side than, you know.
If you're not gonna help, just stay there.
Yeah. If you're not gonna be helpful, just be quiet, basically.
That's it for this week, guys. Thank you so much for listening. We would like our shout-outs to be more interactive in the upcoming episodes. So if you know anyone doing great things or know of a company that is, email us at woke.ishpodcast@gmail.com. That's woke.ishpodcast@gmail.com. Also, feel free to email us or DM us any questions or comments. We might read them out loud on the show. Pay attention to our Instagram page at wokeishpodcast this week, where we will post up the topic for the following week. You can also follow us on Twitter at wokeishpod. Tune in next week. Until next time.
Bye.